I'm Ed Wilkinson, and welcome to On the Block. And today our guest is Father Frank Black, who is the pastor of St. Matthew's Parish over on Eastern Parkway in Crown Heights. We call that Crown Heights, right?
That's Crown Heights. Don't forget Our Lady of Charity and St. Gregory the Great.
You've got a little bit of
together.
everything.
Yeah.
All right, explain that. How does that work?
Well, during Christ Jesus Our Hope, the bishop was trying to figure out how to address the population problem, address the money problem, and address the personnel problem. So he started putting a few of these together. The three of them needed help financially. We have a business manager that was assigned there. And years later, I was blessed with that.
So one of the things your parish is really known for is this Labor Day. We have the West Indian Festival.
Yeah.
And we start with, Catholics anyway, we start with Mass there at St. Matthew's, and the bishop comes. And what's that like? That's a big day at the parish, right?
That's a huge day. I think next year we're actually going to have the Mass the day before and have a big party in the area with all three worship sites and invite people from the diocese. And then the following day we're going to have a smaller Mass and have people just march. The thing is, the West Indian Day, the Carnival Committee they call it, I think, wanted to show the various aspects of Caribbean West Indian culture. And part of that is the faith. I go on mission trips down to Jamaica once a year. And you can stop anybody in the street and say you want to say a prayer together, and they'll pray together. The faith is not something separate from their lives, it's part of who they are. So one of the things they wanted to have is that incorporation of the faith into it. And St. Matthew's is a perfect place to start.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a big Catholic presence in the West Indies, so that'll be a perfect thing to have.
You were actually born on the island of Jamaica.
I was born in Kingston, Jamaica.
Wow.
In 1954.
54?
And yeah.
So when you think of Jamaica, we think of reggae, we think of the music, there's a certain atmosphere. Did you grow up with that?
There was no reggae there when I left. We came here when I was 3. And the reggae and the Rastafarian thing, that's a part of the culture, but not the sum of the culture. That's one part of it, but the other part of it is a combination of refugees from various different parts of the world. My mom her background is Irish, Scottish, and Maroon they call it, which is escaped slave and native island Indian, I guess you want to call it. And we grew up in a very diverse background of people, refugees from various countries, Lebanon, Syria. I thought pork fried rice was a Jamaican meal because every time our Chinese friends came over, they would bring this stuff I thought was a Jamaican meal till later on I got here. So it was a very diverse kind of background. The stereotype we have here is like, the Rasta and the Calypso and the reggae. That's part of it, but Jamaica is a much more rich culture than just what people are seeing.
So your ethnic background is kind of like the whole diocese here in Brooklyn, all in one, right?
It is.
But you were saying how intimate the faith is with the culture there, that it's almost bound together.
Yeah, the faith is a very integral part of who they are as a people. I think that's the whole Caribbean, though.
But they all mix together in ways, like sometimes the Catholic faith, Christian faith, with the native cultures and whatnot. Huh?
The place where I go, there was a church, I'm not sure what denomination actually, about a mile away, and for a while they didn't have a minister. And the priest went and did prayer services for like 6 months with them. He didn't do Mass, he just did prayer services until they got a minister. And they had no problem with that.
Well, what was the faith of your family like growing up? Did you grow up in a Catholic family?
Oh, yeah.
So how did that come about?
My mom wouldn't marry my dad for 20 years because he wouldn't sign the papers saying he wanted to raise his children Catholic. So she said, well, later for you. He was Anglican, Episcopalian, and apparently very much into it. But my mom was very, very dead set on the fact that her children had to be raised Catholic. Her father was a plantation owner in the Montego Bay area, and he had a lot of children that weren't necessarily with his wife, but he always made sure that they were baptized and raised in the Catholic faith. And they all went to Catholic school. And so the Catholic faith is a very important part of who we were. When we first moved here, we used to go to St. Gregory the Great, where this one of my worship sites now. We lived 3 blocks away. Interestingly, when it came time to go to school there, we signed up and they said we were outside the parish. I'm just saying. I don't know. Maybe the boundaries are different. I don't understand. But even with that, we were always told that that was our faith. That was the faith we were supposed to be looking to find truth in. And by the time I was 12, my dad became Catholic.
Wow. But you went to Catholic school, so
Went to Catholic school.
your
Went to
father
Christ the
kept
King.
that promise that you were
Yep.
raised in the Catholic faith.
We went to Christ the King
In Springfield
in
Gardens.
Springfield Gardens. And then, of course, I went to Cathedral Prep.
Right. So you were thinking of priesthood at an early age then?
Listen,
Or-
I really was. I was always fascinated by the whole thing of priesthood. I remember, interestingly, visiting Jamaica, and I remember a Passionist priest who was in our parish, Father Callistus Connolly. Remember his name from I was 3 years old. And I knew he would give out communion around a certain time. And I'd sit there and I'd wait for him to come by. He'd always stop by and he'd say, like, "How are you, Francis? How are things today?" And I said, "Very good, Father." I mean, I love this guy. When I was, I think, 10 or 11, we had another priest that came to my birthday party. I thought it was the most amazing thing in the world. We were always altar servers. We were always participating in the church from we were able to. But I'll tell you very honestly, it was the 60s. And the 60s was an interesting time. Trying to explain to a child why we needed a civil rights movement in the 60s was amazing. Trying to explain why there could have been a possibility of them not accepting me in the Catholic school. Trying to explain why when I got to Christ the King after we moved to Queens, why they said they couldn't find a chair for me. And then, I got this kind of interesting kind of thing that maybe they didn't want me so much, and here I wanted to be a priest, right? So I remember once I went to get a birthday card from my mom, and I had I had $2. It was $5 stipend, and the priest took the $2 from me and gave me an announced mass for my mom's birthday. I didn't know. He was doing me a favor. I didn't know. And he said, "So, Francis, what do you want to be?" And I went, "I'd like to maybe maybe a priest." He goes, "What?" I went, "Well, I don't know if I can." He goes, "No, what did you say?" I said, "I would like to be a priest." He goes, "That's wonderful." These guys took me under their wing, and I started going to Cathedral Prep basketball games with them and stuff. It was a very wonderful feeling to have that vocation accepted and nourished.
And I want to talk about the 60s a little bit more, but right now we're going to take a quick break, and then we're coming right back. Welcome back to On the Block. I'm Ed Wilkinson. This is Father Frank Black, and we've been talking about, Father, your trip from Jamaica as a young kid up here to Brooklyn and to growing up, and we're talking about the 60s. And, today we look back at the 60s as a turbulent time, and it was one of the things that was so turbulent about it was the race relations back in the 60s. And you talked about some of the problems that you encountered as a kid, being a person of color, even in the Catholic Church, that maybe you didn't feel as welcome as you could have been at times.
It's not that I didn't feel as welcome. Looking back on it, I guess I wasn't as welcome as I thought. But my parents did a really, really good job, I think, of protecting me from that part of it. Looking later on, we talked about it. I said, "Yeah, they didn't really want me in Christ the King today." My mother's like, "No, they really didn't."
Well, what was the makeup of the school like at that point? Was it mostly white neighborhoods?
Well, let's put it this way. I'm sort of stuck out in the crowd.
Really?
Yeah, I remember, I can think of 3 black students in my class. And there's another thing now. Okay, so when I was in 4th grade, we actually got, perish the thought, a black teacher.
Really?
Who actually was one of Al Roker's teachers. How did I find this out? I found that out at her funeral, which I said years later. But she was there. She was a fantastic teacher, Mrs. Clarice Burrell. She was fantastic. Everybody loved her. Everybody loved her. She was amazing. She was funny. She was intense. She had us all doing different levels of work at different times. She was amazing. There was a show called Wonderama.
Oh, I remember that.
Sonny Fox.
Yeah.
And they had a segment called Teacher of the Week. So I figured if anybody is going to get this woman on Teacher of the Week, it's going to have to be me. So I write this letter, this letter about how wonderful she is, and they pick the letter. And I get invited to Wonderama with Mrs. Burrell, and the principal didn't want us to go.
Wow.
So my mom happens to call the rectory, the pastor, Monsignor Fitzgibbon. She says, "So how is everything else going, Muriel?" She goes, "Oh, wonderful, Monsignor. You know, my son wrote a letter, and they picked his teacher to go to Wonderama to be this thing on this program, but I guess sister's having a difficult time finding a replacement for the teacher, so they can't go." She goes, "What do you mean they can't go?" She goes, "Yeah, sister's having a tough time, Monsignor." "I understand." She goes, "I think we'll be able to work on that, Mrs. Black."
Wow.
Muriel called me. Hung up the phone, and we ended up going to Wonderama. Met Sonny Fox. I didn't realize how high-pitched my voice was in those days. I watched it, I said, "Yes, Sonny." But we got on there, and the school got a whole bunch of things, gifts and stuff like that, which they never used. But we got them. And fast forward to my ordination, and this little old lady comes walking up to receive communion, and I said, "Body of Christ," and she goes, "God bless you, Francis," and grabs my hand, and it was her.
Wow.
It was the teacher. And then about 5 years later, her daughter comes and says she's dying of cancer. Could I go see her? I went to see her, and I did her funeral at St. Catherine of Siena Church, and after communion, they read the letter.
Wow, what a great story. So what does that say about the role that the church played in trying to improve race relations at that point? It was a very turbulent time, the 60s.
It was a very turbulent time, and the only thing I saw was the reality of the fact that human beings were involved in the church and had various things they were struggling with. But I also saw some other people who went out of their way to combat it. And I didn't realize I was one of the people they were using to combat it in those days. But I saw those priests that were in my parish, very different people, different ages and stuff, as real examples of what it meant to be embracing of everybody. And when I went to Cathedral Prep, it was like the best times of my life.
And this is a predominantly white school at that point.
No, it was an all-white school.
All white school.
I was the only black guy in the school.
Are you kidding? Really?
That was it.
Wow.
The only one. I didn't realize that till I was at the school with Monsignor Calisis, my classmate who was director then, and I said, so we were talking about the diversity in Cathedral Prep, and I said, "Hey, so should I tell them that I integrated my class?" He goes, "Frankie, if you remember, you integrated the whole school." I said, "That's right, I did."
Yeah.
But I
how did you
I
feel?
didn't think about that.
Did you
I
feel
didn't
like
care?
No. But the other guys accepted you. You
Oh
felt.
my gosh, they're still some of my best friends to this day. We had a really tight relationship, which sort of like almost isolated me from what was going on in the rest of society. I didn't really realize it was as bad in the rest of society, because the Cathedral Prep was like this little bundle of like Christianity that just kept us protected from the rest of it.
So move forward, you get to the college then. Does it get any better, the ratio of whites to blacks?
They had a couple more. When I was in the college, I began to realize that there was different experiences of the racism that we had. There were different experiences of how we dealt with one another.
So as you're moving through the system, though, and you're seeing all these differences, and you're becoming aware of what's really going on in society, does that become discouraging at all to you, or do you see the church as a place of refuge?
That gives you something to fight for. That gives you something to a part of Christianity that you can make a reality as you go through life. That gives you you want to share what you have experienced from God with other people and be able to make that a reality. You know, that's not discouraging. That's encouraging. That's why I studied Spanish too.
You studied Spanish in college.
Well, I studied Spanish all the way through. But those were the new people that were coming in, and it gave me. I wanted to be able to be welcoming to those new people, like people were welcoming to me when we came from Jamaica.
All right, you get to the major seminary then, and you're going out to Huntington. And was it a difficult thing to acclimate yourself to?
By that point, it was the least of my worries.
Really?
Yeah. By that point, it was. Yeah. By that point.
Well, some people liked the seminary experience. Some people didn't.
Oh, I couldn't stand it. But
what about it didn't you like?
Well, to avoid getting into painful topics, but a lot of the recent scandals that we have experienced some of those people were in school with me right now, at that particular time, and that was very uncomfortable. That was one thing. There were the education. It was the first time I actually had to like really study. It was a challenging education. There were various people with different ecclesiologies, let's say. People who were a little bit more uptight about certain things, which I didn't quite understand. It was challenging. It was challenging.
Well, it was turbulent times because it was after the Second Vatican Council and things were changing all over the place. And I want to get back into that a little bit more when we come back. But right now we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We're coming right back. Welcome back to On the Block. I'm Ed. This is Father Frank. And we've been talking about your journey. Amazing journey through the seminary system.
Interesting journey.
Yes, I would say so. Tell us about Ordination Day, though. What was that like for you?
Oh, yeah.
Were you doing it as a class then, or was
No.
that was separate?
I was ordained by myself in presentation of Blessed Virgin Mary Parish in Jamaica, Queens. And it was one of those things where it was this whirlwind trip, and I'm lying on the floor, and they're singing the Litany of the Saints, and I'm like, dear Lord, this is really happening.
Yeah.
So much so, I'd been in so many ordinations, and I remember when it was time to go down for the to get the gifts, I was just so spaced out. I mean, I'd been a master of ceremonies, I'd been a cantor, and like I didn't know where I was. And I think the bishop's secretary, Monsignor Lavin, he just turned, he looked at me like Frank, because I was so out of it.
Yeah.
It was one of the most amazing experiences of knowing that you are connected with something so much greater than you.
When you get assigned then to Presentation Church there in
We used to be
Jamaica?
assigned as deacons those days, deacons for 4 months, and you stayed in the parish where you were as a deacon.
Okay.
You were ordained in the parish and you stayed in the parish.
All right, so you stayed there in Jamaica. And,
For 11 years.
No, it's usually just a short time.
Yeah,
for the
11
first-
years. I loved it. Some of the best priests I've ever worked with.
So you're assigned to Presentation in Jamaica as your first parish, and that's a black parish, isn't it?
It was predominantly dark-skinned. I couldn't tell
Well, what does
you.
that mean? What's the difference?
I couldn't tell because I mean you have dark-skinned people from the islands. You have American dark-skinned people. You have dark-skinned people from Africa, which we had a bunch of, and there were dark-skinned people who spoke Spanish.
Okay.
And they came from all over the place. Predominantly, I tell you what, the first funeral I had to say in English, I didn't know how to say it, because I had studied Spanish, and that parish had a Spanish mass of 1,100 people on a Sunday, and myself and Father Charles Keeney were the ones who said that mass. So I was predominantly the Spanish priest at that particular parish for 11 years.
What did you bring to your ministry as a priest about the things that you learned about race and race relations as you grew up?
I had learned, because of how I felt and the things that I'd experienced, I had learned to treat people as individuals, not as categories. So I was able to, I mean, this is a blessing, I think. All these things turned into a blessing. I was able to sort of like, to see beyond the externals and see them see everybody as individuals. So I was blessed to become like a member of so many different families.
Was this a conscious effort, or was this just
No,
something
this just
that came
happened.
in? Yeah.
This just happened. I found it like an amazing thing to be able to do, though. I would never want to put somebody to feeling uncomfortable the way I felt uncomfortable. I was willing to welcome people. So much so that we had Polish parishioners in my last parish, and they laughed at me. They said, "What, are you trying to make sure you reach out to the minorities?" I said, "No, it's just get to know you on your level." You know, you find out the different backgrounds people have, the different cultures they come from, what positive things they have to offer to the church at large, and you try and rope that into building up the church better in whichever area that you're in.
You must have enjoyed your first assignment if you
Loved
were there
it.
for 11 years.
Loved it. Your first love. Your first assignment's your first love. Loved it.
But then from there, you made an abrupt change in your life at that point. What happened there?
Okay, so when I was ordained, I was ordained in May of 1980. My brother graduated from high school in June, and by July, my parents had made all these arrangements for the previous year to move into their house in Florida. And they were young when they got there, youngish, but by the time I'd been in my first assignment for 11 years, they were getting sick, and they needed somebody from the family to be around. So they were going to transfer me anyway, because I'd been there longer than anybody else in my class. So I said, well, if I'm going to have to leave, I need to get a leave of absence to go to Florida. So I got assigned to a parish in Hollywood, Florida. And I was there for 6 months, and my father died, and 5 years later my mom died.
So you basically were down there to be closer to your parents in their old age.
Yeah.
And so you were there for how many years? 6 years?
5.5.
Okay.
And then 2 weeks after my mother died, I get this letter saying, sorry about your mother, now when you're coming back. So
now, most people would say, well, why didn't you just stay down there? You know?
Yeah, but this is my diocese. And I said I was going to come back, so I came back. It was rough to leave a place that had become home, but I came back.
Yeah. And you were assigned where?
To St. Bartholomew in Elmhurst, Queens.
Another very diverse parish, right?
another. That's when I learned all about the Filipino population. Yeah, that was very diverse.
Can you speak Tagalog? Can you say mass in Tagalog? No. Okay. All right.
I'm sure I could read it if I had to.
But there's also a lot of Hispanics in that parish, right?
Yes.
So you were able to use your Spanish?
Except, I don't think anybody believed I could speak Spanish, though. I remember the priest that was there, he did Spanish Mass all the time. And the first Sunday that I had the Spanish Mass, the pastor used to eavesdrop on the Masses from his office. But he said, who was saying that Mass? The Spanish is very beautiful. I said, well, thank you. That was me. So he started saying it more often. But that was a big Spanish population.
And then they decided to make you a pastor?
Yeah, I don't know. I must have really got somebody's bad side.
St. Lawrence, is that?
St. Lawrence.
That's right, in East New York. Would we consider that East New York? Or?
East New York.
Yeah.
Spring Creek Towers area.
Yeah. How did you like taking on the administration?
I can't stand administration.
I knew you'd say that.
But apparently I was okay at it. St. Lawrence is a really small, very loving, very dynamic community. We had some great times there. Our youth group was on this channel a lot, doing the rosary with the bishop.
Let me ask you, our time is running out, but we have a last question for you. If somebody came to you, a young man came to you today and said, I'm thinking about becoming a priest, what do you say to him?
Listen, it's a tough job, but I have never, ever regretted it. And there are more blessings and more consolations and more joys than anybody can possibly imagine. And for those people who say it must be so lonely, I say, I wish. Because you become involved in more families, you have more people around you, you have more joy, and you become involved in more people's lives than you can possibly imagine. So I would say, if you have the grace, you have to have the grace to do it, though.
Yeah.
If you have the grace to do it, don't turn it down.
Father Frank Black, thanks so much for being with us today. You've
pleasure,
been
Ed.
watching On the Block. I'm Ed Wilkinson, been chatting with Father Frank Black. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next time.